Hello, everyone. I'm Rosamund Pike, and it's a very unusual honour to be here as your moderator, your interview host, to talk to Vanessa Kirby about Pieces of a Woman. It's an unusual position for me to be in, and one that I'm really relishing. And I'm not going to blab on here. I'm going to get right stuck in. So, Vanessa, I watched the film again today, and it moved me. I would say as much or even more than the first time I saw it. I think it's such a detailed, beautifully judged performance you give. It's just, I mean, you think, why do people ever watch a film once? Because when you watch it more than once, you get so much more out of it. Now, I was also very moved watching a Q&A when Ellen Burstyn said that occasionally two actors become so completely the person or the characters they need to be for the other person that something really magical happens. And I know that feeling. I know that is the thing that we all crave, is when that other actor is entirely the person that you can believe in, invest in, get everything you want from, feed into and feed from. I'd love you to talk about that.
It is that amazing moment, isn't it, when suddenly you're just in the moment and you don't have to pretend so much, I think. And that did happen a lot on this film. I think I've been wondering why that is. Sometimes alchemy just works, doesn't it? And I think a lot of it for this film is genuinely, I think especially because Cornell, the director, and Kata, who wrote it, is his partner, and they lost a baby, and so it was a very personal story to them. And so I think the kind of like the gravity and the weight of knowing that we were telling not just their story, but a story that's so rarely sort of explored on screen because it's so difficult and it's so rarely talked about in society anyway. I think it gave us this sort of intense commitment in some way to, like, as truthfully as possible, playing out the individual journeys, and those central three all have a completely solitary and individual journey through their own grief, and almost like gulfs apart. And so I think that helped in a way because we were all sort of in our own energies and our own different spaces, really, unable to reach each other. And I think that helped in a way because I remember sort of looking out through Martha's eyes at both of them, not able to understand the signals that they were giving me. I mean, I sort of really had to try and understand being so deeply in your own grief that you can't really access someone else's because you have to take care of your own, which is so immense. It's almost impossible to do that for yourself, let alone anyone else. A good description during the film is Cornell was talking about how you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you can put someone else's on, and I think we were all sort of going through the motions of that. So I don't know whether that helped. Do you know why it happens? I guess it's on some projects and then not so much on others.
Yes, I think you're right. I think there's about the investment in the subject matter, the commitment to characters or an idea, and it's a chemistry. It's a chemistry that isn't necessarily between two individuals. I think it's this curious chemical combination of actor plus character, plus character. So, I think people sometimes try and replicate on-screen chemistry in another movie, and sometimes it doesn't work as well because it's that curious thing of those two actors and those two characters. So but it's very magical when it happens. But it did feel to me the second time very much a film about, well, two things really. One, this study of how we are supposed to feel or what the expectation, when something so catastrophic happens that there is no roadmap, who dictates how we should take it and how we should feel. And I feel that for Martha, particularly, there are lots of people imposing on her or trying to impose on her how she should be behaving or how she should be feeling. And I wondered whether acting that, did you feel the onslaught of those things coming at you, or did you feel free to sort of navigate your own path, or was it a reactive performance, from in the playing of it, or or as you said, was your sort of gas mask on, and you were on your own journey that kind of couldn't be reached? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's such a beautiful question. It was sort of a combination of both of them, really, because it was, on the one hand, I remember, I think because I as her was feeling like such an alien to the normal world buzzing around you, and walking into the office for the first time, and which is one of the first things we shot after the birth, and doing this sort of very day-to-day things like going to the shopping mall and go to the supermarket, and those things that are completely everyday, and yet suddenly after something like this, when your reality is just totally shattered and you're sort of almost like underwater, everything, like all the energy in the air, like the particles have just shifted, and everything that was so ordinary before is like a whole new reality, and yet everyone else is just carrying on. And so I sort of really felt like that inside it. And then obviously with the characters that were closer to her, because they were expressing so much at her, and it always struck me like none of them ever sit down and go, how are you, like how, in the movie. And I think it's because it's so sort of exploring that that, exactly as you described, your own path to navigating how you put yourself back together. I often thought of it like almost like a mirror had smashed, and all the pieces are on the floor, and you just have to do some of the fragments work? Do they not? How do I construct it again so that I can find any sort of equilibrium again in my life? And so when there was like emotion coming at her, I think I felt as her sort of so unable to understand it, actually. It almost felt like a different language.
And did that happen for real? I sense it did happen in your body, that I know you spoke to a lot of women who had suffered loss of a child, which must have been, devastating to hear that, because I'm sure they talked to you in great detail and probably gushed full of feelings that maybe hadn't been articulated for a while. And I'm sure you took that on. So did you feel that it all just got into your body and you could just be, or were you thinking of the way they described? I imagine they described where grief sits, what it feels like. Is it in your tummy, or is it in your hands, or is it, I'd love to hear what you sort of decided. Where does grief sit? I find that a very interesting question, and I'm sure that these women who you spoke to were very helpful.
Totally. And it's so funny because, I sat with a lot of them for a really long time. And I realized that like one particular, she's called Kelly, and she lost a baby called Luciana. I've talked about them a lot. She doesn't mind at all, because she's so part of it, and so is Luciana. And, I remember at one point we talked about everything. She was so brave to tell a relative stranger, the hardest thing she's ever been through. And, it was really emotional. And I think she knew that in some way she wanted to help, like she wanted to help the if anyone was out there that needed to feel, like less alone somehow. And I remember towards the end, I said, actually, Kelly, do you know what? I just realized I really need to understand how it felt, like literally in your body, because when you hear something, you can have like unbelievable empathy and understanding, but to then actually get inside it,
yeah,
of course, you're so right. You sort of have to start knowing how that feels. And so she really took me through it, and I sort of kept asking like forensic questions about it so that I could try and go into that space. Yeah, like she said, okay, it's a bit like, so the only way I can describe how it felt was I'm standing on the top of a mountain, the tallest one like in the world, Everest, or higher than you could ever imagine. And I'm looking down, and the world is below me, and it's just carrying on. And it's just carrying on as normal. People are, speeding around. Life is faster than ever. And I'm alone on top of this mountain, and wind is just like rushing past me, faster, as fast as I can't remember the exact description, like a hurricane wind. And she's trying to scream and no one can hear. And yet everyone's just continuing. And so I printed out a load of pictures, lots of Francis Bacon ones actually, that I felt like tapped into that. And I sort of kept that book with me everywhere I went. And before scenes, I would look at it. Because it's sort of that feeling.
In the shopping centre, I think, for a start, there's that red coat that, is such a striking colour, and yet it's just a carapace that's, I'm going to cry, it's such a carapace of protecting this completely broken thing inside, but has the structure of something that's put together, and yet that inside there's not, there's a rag doll really, and in the shopping centre where you see people they do see you get us into the subjective experience so well that the woman, whoever she is, I don't know what she's buying, she looks like a sort of freak, or not a freak, but something so bizarre, and you think, why are you minding about choosing a new pair of pants, or whatever she's doing. We're so in your experience by then, you make the ordinary seem odd and sort of strangely irrelevant, and all of that. It's quite brilliant, and obviously the filmmaking does that too.
You're so right. You just reminded me that a friend of mine lost his dad, and he talked just before we started filming. He was saying that he was an actor and he was doing a Shakespeare play, and his dad died, and he had to step away, and he was in like just the hardest grief. And he then came back on stage like a week later, and he said he looked around at everyone doing Shakespeare, and it felt like so different. It felt like a completely different experience, that it would never be the same again. And he sort of thought, what are we all doing? And the whole reality was like a different dimension in some ways. And I think it's so true when something we don't see coming that kind of completely like ruptures our reality, I guess, that you never would have planned or even imagined. And how do we put ourselves back together? How do we get through it, even a day at a time? I think that's why after the birth, the film sort of looks at all these different fragments of these different moments of someone sort of finding her way through, really.
And I know you've talked a lot about the amazing opening sequence, and how wonderful it is that the title comes up at the end of that. And also within that terribly, harrowing, you've got all the reality of, that first moment with a baby. I mean, it's wonderful. There's this moment of sheer joy in the middle of that sequence. There's the moment where the baby is in your arms, and it's a wonderful thing. And I think, I know that you also watched a woman give birth, right? So I think always on film, so rarely do people capture quite how animal giving birth is. It's the most animal we ever are. It's the least cerebral and the most physical. And if you can get your mental brain out of your rational brain out of the way, your body knows how to do this thing. And I wondered how your body knew how to do this thing, as you haven't yet done it. And I believed it 100%, having had a home birth myself. And talk to me about that. The noises, the little burps, did your body start to, I know this can happen, that if your brain tricks your body well enough, it can sweat, it can produce all the chemicals. So I really want to know what happened.
It's true, isn't it? I think like I heard ages ago that the psyche doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's not real. So I think there was a part of me that thought, oh my God, I was so worried about getting it wrong, because I thought, God, there's such an opportunity to represent birth as it really is. And it was such an amazing, profound journey for me, because, I started going, okay, I've got to watch every documentary I could possibly find, and speak to all my friends about their birthing experiences. And everyone had completely different stories, and also a lot of them couldn't really remember because it's just you're on your own, you're on a complete journey with it, I guess. And so then I sort of started watching every documentary, and none of the documentaries left me with any better idea of how to act it. Because it was all just like little moments, edited moments and like little flashes of this and flashes of that. But I was like, yeah, but how long between contractions? And what is a whole contraction? Like, how long does it last? And what does being dilated mean? And when does your water break? And all this stuff, because I knew that no one at the end of the day, because they were doing an unbroken take, like if I got a second of it wrong, then any woman that's done it, any man that's watched a woman do it, will just be like, oh, well, that's not real. And then you wouldn't care, you wouldn't be with her. And so it was totally terrifying. But after, I realized from those documentaries, I was like, this is so interesting. I wonder why it's not shown in its entirety. Like, why is that? Especially when, with death, we see death so much in films. I mean, in every single which way, and I thought, God, that's so interesting. And I guess it is such a testament to why we need more female writers, because she was truly right about her experience and her relationship to a baby that she lost. And I feel like it's so needed, because I was none the wiser. And I thought, I'm actually genuinely really excited to give birth now. And I feel like I've had an amazing education about it that I wouldn't have had. And it's just what you said. It's like the whole ride of it, all the colors of being human happens.
And in those takes, which, what you get so brilliantly is the sort of moments of kind of ease to moments of sort of pernickety frustration with sort of irritation, which I think little things do irritate, like the rubbish or the smells, or all those details of suddenly smells being very intense, or the sort of, and then sort of lack of ability to do something, and also the energetic change. I thought that was so extraordinary how you captured that, because I think there's a profound energetic change where you're not so human. I can't really describe it. And you got that. You captured that.
That was literally because of the woman that I saw,
right.
So what happened is I wrote to loads of obstetricians, some in America, a lot in London, and one amazing woman, Claire Mellon, her name is, which funnily enough, she delivered Catherine Waterston's baby. And I just worked with Catherine at just doing it. It was so bizarre. It was like such a moment of weird synchronicity. And so she let me come to the labour ward, and I spent many days with the midwives, and they were showing me, and I was sort of crawling all around the birthing room and taking a million notes and going through the scene with them, and they were sort of helping me understand, even what a contraction is and how long it lasts and what it looks like. And while we were there was like a woman really screaming, down the hall while she was giving birth. And there was another one that was like really, really quiet. And I obviously didn't get to see any of them, but I heard, and I was like, God, but they're all making such different, everyone's got, is there not one noise that everyone makes? It was like a whole, I was still sort of so ignorant still, actually. And then there was my last afternoon on the labour ward, one of the midwives came out and she said, oh, a lady's come in and she's 9 centimetres dilated. And I'm going to ask if she'd mind if you just sat in the corner and were with her. And I thought, there's just no way. Why would she say yes to some random person to sitting with her in that really, really, truly holy moment? But she did. She said yes. And it was a complete miracle, because I sat in the corner and I watched her for nearly 8 hours. And I just saw all of life, in that, in what she did, and like the power and the kind of trip she went on. And she felt really,
it's like a trip. So she wouldn't have probably known you were there.
I didn't think so.
At that point, I don't think it matters who's there. So you saw, I think, that sort of complete altered trip state. Yes,
altered state, yeah. And that was so amazing to me, because I just thought I would never have known that.
Yeah.
I would never have known that. And she also felt really nauseous. She wasn't burping. So it's funny when you said, like, did your body sort of knows what to do? Right. I just imagined I felt nauseous, and then those burps came, much to my horror.
Yes, but isn't that magic? I thought, that's the nervous system working. I think that's just, that's when you're fully in it. It's wonderful. And of all the 6 takes, I think you said you did 6 takes of which is, I know it's a wonderful thing to do because you don't have to stop and start, and you can just submit to the whole experience.
Yeah.
But did you feel that the one that's in the movie is the magic one, or did they all have? Was it very hard, do you think, for Cornell to choose at the end?
I I don't remember them.
Don't
Is
you?
the
Oh,
truth.
interesting.
I don't remember which one was which. I have a couple of memories of like, because mostly the lines are all improvised. So I remember conversations or jokes that we did or moments we had that aren't in it, but I can't recall what any of the differences between them really. Because all we knew, we had the rough shape of being in the kitchen, few contractions there, few contractions in the living room, must get in the bath at some point. There was one move
Yes.
choreographed, which was the hand just bringing the camera in. So that was the only
Yes.
time when I had to be like, okay, you have to wait for the camera. I can't just do what I need, whatever. But apart from that, I think every single one was really different. I remember, I don't know, there's something in it, isn't there, of doing a whole day, and then the fourth one when you're just tired and you're like, okay, well, whatever. You're sort of not even remotely planning anything because you've already done three. It's like, I always find it in theatre. I don't know if you do, when you've done a matinee show, and in the evening you're like, whatever, I've just done one. Like I sort of stopped thinking about it. But yeah, it was. I do remember. I remember a couple of notes I had, like, oh, push it further, or in this take, get really primal. So I think one, I probably did way too much, but
Mm.
it was. I don't remember much else, to be honest.
I know a lot of has been talked about the beginning of the film, and I also want to talk about the end, um, because for me it also seemed to be this journey of somebody towards a woman being able to speak her truth, I
Mm.
suppose. And I think speaking one's truth is something that I'm very, very interested in as I get older and in life generally. Knowing your truth first and then speaking it. But do you think it needed to happen in court? I was wondering, do you think she knew she would reach that point, or do you think the whole rigmarole of being in court and sort of swearing, first of all, you have to swear to speak the truth, and
Mm.
which frankly is absurd when you haven't really worked out what your truth is yet. It's not a fact-based witness statement she's being asked to give, is it? So I just like to hear your thoughts on speaking your truth and
Mm.
whether it needed to come in court.
Yeah, it was quite a long process because I had to try and work out the sort of psychological truth of, firstly, holding everything in and not being able to, or not having the capacity even, or the bandwidth to be able to express to anyone the immensity of the pain that you're in. And why at the dinner scene is that where she releases a huge valve of it? Why that moment? Why not a week before? Why not with her husband? When I worked that out,
what did you think that was?
Well, firstly, obviously being in a family dynamic is always a bit of a pressure cooker. But I felt like the internal shame that Martha has, so much of it is feeling like she might have been responsible for it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so many of the women I spoke to talked about the sense of failure that they had, and not being able to like live with the idea that they might have done something wrong to cause it, even though of course they hadn't, but living with that internally. And so for Martha, that line when she says, oh, I'm not going to the hospital or whatever, I think that has played in her mind through all the endless sleepless nights. I imagined her having so many, like, unable to sleep, and almost not being able to articulate the guilt and shame of that to anybody. And I just imagined sort of when she came into the dinner that she was thinking, everyone's thinking that, but they're not saying it. Everyone's thinking that I did it. Everyone's thinking that, so that it's almost too great to know how to articulate that, especially if you don't feel safe in a safe environment. And then of course the pressure is from the mother to go to the civil case and testify, because that's what the mother needs. And I think it comes to a point where everyone has needed her to be a certain way for them to feel okay. you know, that she needs to do this, express this, or like go through the grieving process like this, rather than how she is, for them to feel better. And I think it gets to a point where the trial is so triggering for her, because it represents exactly what her mother wants.
Yeah.
That she can no longer hold it down. So it comes out, but it's not fully, you know, because I imagine then she put the lid back on and agrees to go to the trial, because she's never really said no to her mother, except to have a relationship that's so wildly opposite to anything her mother would want, which is always what we do, isn't it? We do the opposite sometimes of what we're sort of told we should do. And then at the trial, I don't think she wants to be there. I don't think she ever expects, ever. And what I couldn't understand is why when someone who hasn't been able to even say a literal word about how she's feeling, stand up in front of a room full of strangers and talk about it, you know? I was like, I couldn't, as an actor, I was like, how do I understand this? I could like understand the truth of this. And then I realized that, of course, her being pushed so much by that prosecutor, who really pushes and forces her to go back into the memory of something that I think, you know, part of the reason that she wants to donate her daughter to the university and stuff is quite simply to almost suspend the loss. Because if I don't have a memorial, if I don't have a burial, if I don't have a gravestone, then I don't actually have to face the fact she's not here, you know, and that maybe she kind of is still here if I don't. So it's like trying to preserve, so you're almost like frozen in time a little bit. And so when you're pushed, just because you happen to have to go to a trial, to go back into the memory of quite literally looking at her, I think that's when she is the beginning of her actually for the first time confronting it. And that's why then she goes to get the photos developed, because she suddenly has the most immense urge to look at her and see her again. And then when she does that, she realizes that I think then the thawing sort of begins to happen. And I think she goes, just like you said, back to the courtroom to testify to her daughter. Like, I acknowledge you, and actually that was 1 minute, but it was the most precious moment of my whole life. And it's not going to be, your life isn't going to be to someone else's suffering. And yes. I have to say this in public because I have to acknowledge you, you know, in a way that it's for baby.
I mean, I found the photographic, the developing studio, I found that, for me, that was one of the most devastating scenes, moving and truthful. And because I thought, you know, I could imagine your fear sort of thumping in your heart as those photos come out. And then you find out they're negatives, which of course is so sort of painfully symbolic, that this negative image of your child is there. And then, I mean, when you see the image come into color and come into relief, and suddenly you can acknowledge yourself as a mother, you know, see yourself with your child in a moment of mother and child. It's so beautifully done, and it's so moving. And I thought that such a lot has been spoken about at the beginning of the film, but for me, that's equally powerful. That scene, I mean, you know, it's all subjective, isn't it, to the viewer? But it felt like a reconnection with not you as having done something wrong, but you as a sort of complete moment of rightness in that minute, which we felt watching that, however many seconds it was.
Totally. And I think in that moment, realizing for her realizing that it was, her daughter was total grace, you know, and it was just she's, and like you said, still a mother. And so many of the women I spoke to, you know, some of them have lost 5 babies, and they say, I'm a mother to all 5 of them. And so it's sort of a journey for someone returning to that truth, you know, and therefore learning to live alongside the loss and know that she'll always be a mother to her baby.
Did Cornell and Kata, were they both very present all the time on set? I mean, were they both feeding thoughts or supporting you, or one take before, during filming? Or
they really were. They were there all the time, and you know, Kata was on set throughout every minute, and I was so grateful. And I'd often go to her behind the monitor and say, like, oh, and ask her for help, or like say, was that true? because the character of Martha is so different from me. I'm like really outwardly expressive, especially with how I feel. Like you can always tell how I'm feeling for the most part. And so I sort of had to really try and understand someone that doesn't show it. And also I was like a bit worried that maybe the camera would think I was doing nothing and I was fine, you know. And that was like quite a weird thing to know how to trust that. I just thought, oh my god, this could be the most boring thing ever, because you're just going to watch someone go buy some peas in the frozen section. You know, it was like quite hard to trust that. And so I had to understand what nature of personality it is, you know, to in a human to seem like. One of the lines that was like a big key to it all for me was the very beginning. Sean says, "Oh, Martha's fine. She's always fine."
I know.
You
I
know?
heard that today, which I didn't
Mm.
obviously pick up on the first time round. She's always all right. Yeah.
She's always fine, and you know if I'm not fine. So I thought, oh, this person has to seem like she's always fine, and why is that? And Kata's story is, you know, she comes from a generation of Holocaust survivors, and that's why she wrote it into the script, to have, you know, a mother that had her children very late and was a direct survivor, you know, as a child, and how that generation deals with trauma and how that's passed on through epigenetics. I mean, literally. And I think a part of it was understanding that when such an extreme trauma like this happens to someone like Martha, she has to try and be fine, you know, and that's her sort of inherited innate response, you know, to just be able to get up and just be okay and get through it. And so I think it's the journey of also breaking the pattern of that and going like, it's okay not to be okay, because this is my truth, you know, and that's, I think, part of finding her own voice at the very end, which has helped me really like feel like I can find mine in some ways.
I'm sure the film has had a lot of impact on you. I'm sure you've been changed by the experience. I'd like. I wondered whether your emotions. I mean, this is very personal. Maybe you don't want to answer it, in which case I'll ask something else. But I wondered whether during the filming your own emotions would surface in sort of unexpected ways, or as Martha, that sort of, you know, it's sort of as Martha, but the two blur, I think, when you're working as intensely as that. You know, whether you seemed unfamiliar to yourself, really.
Yes, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Do you know what? It was actually, it wasn't during it, it was more after. It took me many months for it to leave me, actually.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect it, because I so loved doing it all. I so loved being asked to go to that place, you know, and it I only ever felt like I was required to because of the women that told me their stories and had been in that place, and no one ever knew, maybe, you know. And so I felt like I was sort of carrying it for them. So that was also a gift, because it never felt like, I didn't know about me and my performance and, you know, anything like that. It just sort of, I just had them with me all the time. And sometimes I play their recordings, and so while I was in it, I was sort of so focused and so allowed myself to go to like feel the things that Kelly and so many other women had described to me, and to sort of live in that space. It was only, I came home and it was about 2 weeks, and then the pandemic happened. So I was quite literally confined to my bedroom, pretty much, feeling the feelings. And it was like waves of stuff coming up that I didn't recognize. And I sort of had to understand that I had to try and get a bit of distance and be like, okay, I don't think this is mine. I think this is just the experience of doing, you know, 3 months on a movie that I cared so much about, and, you know, asked me to go to a really sort of hard place inside myself. And that took many months really to sort of truly come off me.
It's very brave to do and I, you know, I know a lot of people will have asked you, you know, how did you feel when you read the script, and what did you feel? And I know that, you know, it doesn't usually work quite like that. And, you know, and I'm sure there was a point that you read it, I imagine, and thought, I know I've got this in me, but I don't know how I can communicate to somebody that I have this in me. And how do I know this could be mine, but how do I, and I just would, you know, maybe to finish, I'd love to, you know, because I'm sure it came with fear. And I wondered, when you flew to meet Cornell in Budapest, you know, what were you thinking, and did you know that you had it in you to a degree? Obviously, you did not yet have the experience, and you hadn't done your research, but did you have a sort of gut feeling that you had it in you?
Yeah, I didn't know if I could do it, but I read it in an hour, and I was just so moved by it, and I felt like it was so sort of brave, to unflinchingly go into a place that we've all been in different parts of our life, you know, whether it's a week-long period of grief or months long or whatever. It felt like it had birth, which is the most universal thing we can go through, and also confronting death, you know. And I think the fact that it was sort of daring to do both those things in one movie felt like really special. And it was one of those things that you go, I just really want to be involved in this. I mean, my God, who do I think I am to think I can undertake this when I haven't given birth? And, you know, I, yeah, just that alone, really. And then, you know, I hadn't led a movie before. So, and I'd watched loads of people do it on set, and, you know, obviously been on many jobs where I just sort of watched someone do it in their way and absorbed and like learnt loads. And I felt really ready to do that. But I sort of just, I think that's why, because it was going to be a phone call with Cornell, and I was like, no, I'm going to get on a plane to see him.
Yeah.
And there was an accident on the motorway, so I ended up missing it. But I waited in the lounge. I was like, I'm getting on the next one, even if we have 2 hours together. And we did. We had 2 hours together because I had to come back that evening to give something else the next day. And I just sat in front of him and just said, this is just, I felt like there's so much soul in this somehow. There's something that's really unusual about this, and I would just so love to be involved. So it was that. And then of course it's that thing with actors. And I remember John Baldwin always saying to me, I did a little film with him years ago. He was like, "Oh, bloody actors. Whenever you get the job, you instantly go, you want it, you want it, you want it, you get it." And then you're like, actually, oh no, I don't, do I really want to do this? You know,
Yeah.
it was a bit like that when Cornell was like, yeah, I'd really like to do this with you. I thought, oh my God, okay, what have I taken on? And I just, you know, and it was almost like risking failing, you know, moving through the fear of possibly failing. But in that sense, the sort
But
of
you didn't
the
fail,
heart of it.
and you you triumphed, but also a bigger, you know, a personal triumph, yes, but also, you know, you triumphed in making an important film which sheds a light and gives a voice, as you say, to all these people who have had this experience filled with sorrow. And you know, that's very important. And I know that the weight of all that is on you at the moment, and I know how big and you know, wonderful it is that it's getting all these accolades, but also the responsibility is big, and you know, the subject matter is huge, and I'm sure, you know, you feel it very deeply, as we know. And it's you know, it's bigger, it's bigger than just the movie. I think, I wonder if you feel that.
I do, in the sense that I feel so grateful that I've had an experience in my life that helps me. Like,
Be
I'm
more
really
human, more.
sensitive. Yeah, I'm really sensitive to someone going through something really hard now. You know, like I can pick up on it way quicker. I sort of, I know how to hold space for it more. You know,
Mhm.
I guess shared experience generally, and I know, you know, I've said this, a lot of the women that have spoken to me all have spoken to us after the film. I'm like, of course, I didn't go through it, and you know, I sometimes find it hard being even speaking on it, because I'm like, of course, I just tried to understand as best as I could. I didn't myself go through that, but I guess I'm definitely more acutely aware of anyone sort of going through grief or having a hard day, and a lot of the silence, you know, or the someone might appear to be fine, but they might not be. And I can now pick things up much better. And that's a beautiful thing, I think, to learn, because I think I'm just really glad, I'm just really grateful and glad that it taught me that, because I know I'll go through many hard things in my life, and people that I love will too, because we all have to. It's just so part of the human experience. And I yeah, I feel much more able to hopefully be there or support someone that is, I guess.
I'm sure. And what about germination? To just end on a lighter note, did you also study and research germination as carefully as?
Oh no, I didn't. I didn't. Do you know what
Did you
helped me
pore
most?
over books on saplings and growth and
No, I didn't.
seed
I didn't,
sprouting?
and I still haven't. I tried to plant some seeds in lockdown, and actually, they did grow, but I've never harvested them. So I think they've died. The carrots have all died. It's terrible. What a weird thing to do. But no, you know what? I tried. The way I made sense of the apples was a friend who had had 3 miscarriages really late on, and it had just been, it was just horrendous. She said she went through a period, because it was over a period of many months. She went through this period of just making sourdough every night. And her husband would come home and never talk about it, but he'd just see her doing this sort of sourdough. She'd stay up to the early hours, and then it didn't work. And sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. And she said afterwards, she said to me, she's like, I didn't really realize what was going on at the time, but I think I was trying to nurture something that was random, you know, that sometimes the I don't, because I've never done it, I don't know how you call it, but like sometimes it grows, and the mixture's perfect and it works, and sometimes it doesn't, and there's no rhyme or reason. It might just be like dampness in the air, or you don't know. And I think so much of the sort of movie is really about that, about those things that we can't explain, and we can't find reasons, and we can't know, and we have to live with not knowing, and find peace with it somehow, in all the unexplained things. And so no, I didn't do a load of research on on
No,
seeds.
but
I
that's
just
a
stared at them
beautiful
a
way
lot.
to understand, because I did want to know how, if the apples made a sort of deep sense to you, and that's a perfect way of explaining it. And yeah, the movie does. Yes, how we
Also,
can nurture the little things. How we can, in pain, how we can find some
yeah,
self nurture and the capacity for nurturing something else.
totally. Which is why I think she said hundreds of loaves. Isaac, her husband, can't even look at a sourdough. He's like, I've had so much of it. And they have a really beautiful baby now. Yeah, that was how I sort of, that was my way into that.
Well, this has been such a wonderful chance for me, actually, and I hope other people enjoy our conversation, because for me it's been completely a treat. Um, this is the kind of conversation I love to have and don't have often enough, really.
Rosamund, thank you so much. You don't
You're
understand how
so
much this
welcome.
means to
So
me. And
welcome. It's a brilliant film, well worth watching more than once. I'm so full of admiration and awe for what you did.